Here we go. There we are, we're live. Good morning. It's exciting, isn't it? Good morning, River. How are you?
I'm very, very well, thank you, Claire. Yeah, it's a
Good,
lovely
good.
sunny morning.
Yes, and it's sunny in Brighton and it's sunny in Maidstone. So, do you know, how totally British is that? Whenever I do a live, I always have to look at the weather and go, yes, there is weather. Yes, I'm British. It's funny, isn't it? I don't know how we do that. Now, I'm just going to put my phone on so that I'll edit this first piece out for the when I upload it properly to YouTube and that.
Great.
But I'm just going to, and so I can see the comments as they come up. And always as I do this, you end up with me talking twice, which nobody needs. One of me is quite enough. But however much I turn my phone off, for some reason, it always comes up twice. So now I'm on the wrong thing, which is why it's not coming up. But yes, so here we are. So today is me. Where am I? Oh, no, I've got it turned off. Brilliant. So
Okay.
Today I've got the lovely River Jones with me. Now, I'm really, really excited about this. River is a celebrant, has been for a long time. And River is the person that taught me how to be a celebrant, how to be a funeral celebrant, because I was already a celebrant when I started. I think I was just a register. Yeah, I was already a celebrant, wasn't I? Yeah. So, but this is the lady that taught me how to become a funeral celebrant. And I have to say, I've had some rather lovely feedback from some of my services. So, yes. So, River, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be a funeral celebrant, please?
I can, yes. So whenever people say, tell me a little bit about yourself, the first thing I always think of is I'm a mum. I'm a mum. I've got 3 sons, grown-up sons, and I'm soon to be a grandmother this year.
Oh, congratulations.
And for most of my working life before becoming a celebrant, I was involved in sort of adult education-y type of things. I started off running creative writing courses out in the community and working with all sorts of different kinds of people, and then ended up doing that for the University of Sussex in the sort of mid-90s, and then ended up working at the university from 99 to 2012. I had an office at the University of Sussex, and I ran kind of various kind of community outreach.
Oh, wow.
But my celebrancy started about the same time as that job started, because the same year that I got that office was also when I was asked to do my first ceremony, which was a hand fasting.
Right.
I was completely bowled over to be asked, really. And I didn't even know what a hand fasting was, but I kind of, made my, they were really clear that they'd liked the way this couple I'd met them through we were actually doing a Beltane ceremony, so celebrating the coming of May.
Yeah.
With the women's group that I did sort of full moon ceremonies with, and we at that time there were some really lovely sort of energetic younger women than me that really were keen to do this kind of public ceremonies for what we call the cross quarter festivals. So they're May and Lunasa, Lammas at the beginning of August, and Samhain and Imbolc. So we did this May Day ceremony, and this couple asked me to do their hand fasting, and that's how it all started, really. And then the funerals, that was a little bit later. I think it was about 2005 that I did my first funeral, 2004, which was actually for a friend of mine who had died very suddenly in an accident. And her and her partner, I used to teach a little bit of yoga at that time, and her and her partner used to come to this little yoga class that I did. And I don't know how it was that Kim knew that I was wanting to do. I think she maybe knew that I'd done weddings and things, and then just said, you do Tanya's funeral. And obviously that was sort of quite a big one to start with. I didn't really realise it at the time, you know, that it was quite a big deal to start with this sort
Yeah.
of sudden tragic loss, you know, of a really you know, relatively young, I think she was about 40, you know,
Oh,
amazing
that's young. Yeah.
woman really. But yeah, it was great because the people that I was working with, I knew her partner well, and her best friend since childhood was the sort of other main person who was supporting her partner with it. And so we were able to just sort of work together really closely to
Yeah.
create something that kind of felt right for her.
And was
Yeah.
that hard being somebody you knew? Because I've yet to have that happen. The closest I've had so far is my friend's great aunt and my friend's mother-in-law, neither of whom I knew.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it is really different when you know somebody, you know the person, but also, you know the people close to them.
The grief, yeah.
We kind of knew each other well, but it was sort of in that, when you know friends of friends well.
Yeah.
So you have socialized together and been on collective, you know, and been to each other's parties and things, but they're not the people that are in that kind of close inner circle. I actually had the first one of those this year.
Oh, was that really difficult?
And it was
Yeah.
much harder actually.
Yeah. I think it must be.
Yeah. I think one of the things I discovered is that I'm never ever going to do a funeral for somebody that I know on a single slot ever again.
Yeah, I can. It's not a very long time span that you've got, is it?
Fortunately, there was nobody in there after us, but you know,
thank goodness.
I ran out in the middle and said, "I'm really sorry, I'll pay for the extra slot."
Good. Well, I can understand that, because sometimes it just goes. You know, if you've got not even a lot to say, but to try to encapsulate somebody's life in a short period of time is very difficult sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah. And it was one of those where we'd had some time for an open floor, and actually there was a lot more of that, you know, people wanted to talk, and you know, I couldn't possibly kind of cut anyone short in those circumstances.
No, you can't, can you? No, that's I've not done one like that yet, but that's something that I contemplated with one of the recent ones I did, because that was a young lady who had died very suddenly. She was 35. What I did in the end was I collated all the Facebook memories of her. I joined, they had a tribute page, so I with their permission, I joined the tribute page and said, "I'm the celebrant, give me your stories about Alicia." And I had people texting me, messaging me, and it was brilliant. And I got most of them in, and they were really pleased with how that one went. But anyway, today you are here to talk about memorial rituals. I know you've got some interesting experiences that you're really passionate about. So would you like to tell us a bit more about that? I can't wait to hear about these.
Yeah. So memorial rituals, why I wanted to talk about this subject, I mean, I get, you know, we've just touched on it really, haven't we, that for what the standard kind of creme slots are half an hour that we get, aren't they? We have to do the service, get everyone in and out of there, you know, in half an hour, or sometimes 45 minutes if we're lucky. And some families might have the double slot, but that's what we have as our kind of funeral space, you know, here in modern Britain. And I think that's similar in a lot of the kind of the Western Northern Hemisphere world, isn't it?
Yeah,
that we
I think
have
so.
that kind of fairly you know, brief moment. And what happens to people, what happens to the families, you know, the people that are suffering grief and loss after the funeral. And I had a real kind of eye-opening experience, I suppose. What really got me started thinking about this, I was about to say going to Sumatra, but I realised now that it was actually goes all the way back to this lady Tanya, who was my first funeral. And I think what was really great about that was it was very much a kind of community with a community within a community. So she's around, she's a bit older than me. So I think, you know, if she was still around today, she would be about 60. And her and her partner Kim were very much part of this quite close-knit lesbian and gay community in Brighton. And during that year, certainly the first year following Tanya's funeral, on her birthday, on their wedding anniversary, and then on the anniversary of the death, there were gatherings again that happened. You know, I think on her birthday it was a gathering on the beach, you know, and people lit candles and brought food together, and there were just these moments where the community came together, really supporting the bereaved partner, you know, but sharing their grief together, and, you know, remembering Tanya together. And it just, that kind of got me thinking, you know, how great to have those moments and those, but that sense of the wider community, you know, holding that person, you know, through their life.
And it being ongoing too, it not being there's your service, get on with it. It's kind of a continued remembering and a share and an honouring, isn't it? I think that's a beautiful idea.
And then following on from that, a couple of years after that, 2006, my father-in-law died. My Indonesian father-in-law, who had in the year before he died, I'd had both my parents-in-law over. They'd come over to the UK for 6 months. They have 2 sets of grandchildren here in the UK, but they spent most of the time with us. You know, we were picking up my youngest from nursery every day, and I would get home from work to sort of see him sort of sleeping on his grandfather's lap, you know, every day. And that, so that they really had become a very, you know, close part of our family life, you know, in that time. And then in, you know, the year after he was ill, and obviously it's quite difficult when people are far away, you know, to that far away to know when is the moment. But there was that moment where, you know, my husband got a call and said, no, you better come. And he went, and then the next day I sort of got tickets for the rest of us to go as well. And my husband arrived about a day and a half before his dad died, and we were actually in transit, me and my 2 younger children, you know, when he died. So we got home to the village, you know, within 24 hours of his death. And so I didn't quite see everything in motion, but basically what had happened, you know, my husband told me was, you know, they'd called back and said, you know, he's dead, we're bringing him back from the hospital. The neighbours then went around to the house, you know, whilst the ambulance was making its journey of sort of 3 or 4 hours, you know, from the city hospital where he died, and cleared all the furniture. They cleared all the furniture out of the living room. They made up his bed in the middle of the room with all the best sheets. They started cooking, you know, people had started sort of sending the invitation out. The tradition there is there's 3 days of kind of funeral rites leading up to the burial. And, you know, the beginning of which was, you know, I arrived with my kids, and there's their granddad, you know, lying in his bed in the middle of the room with my mother-in-law next to him. And I just was immediately, you know, a little bit emotional and teary. And she then started saying to me, no, just cry, you know, like this, and kind of, you know, showing me wailing. And then somebody else arrived, and then that's what then my husband's cousin arrived, who's this man in his 40s, and just sat down beside and was going, oh, uncle, why did you die? You know, and just kind of, you know, this outpouring information that is actually, you know, far from being like it is here, you know, this courage is actually kind of positively supported and encouraged. And then in amongst that, you know, life is going on. I mean, I wish I'd brought it upstairs with me. I could kind of post it on your page afterwards. I've got a picture downstairs of my father-in-law lying, you know, on his bed with my mother-in-law sat next to him, and his 5 sons all lined up with their arms around each other, smiling, you know, posing.
Wow, that's
Funeral
amazing.
picture. Which is a
Amazing.
kind of, you know, that is a sort of normal thing there. So alongside this like outpouring of emotion, it's also okay to smile and life goes on. And then there was the night before the actual big funeral, you know, the day of the burial, there was a whole, by that time all of the family had arrived, and there was in that evening, everybody, starting with his eldest brother, who's like the most senior of the family,
Yeah.
you know, shared their memories of him, you know, talked about him. And then all the kind of young people from the village came around and they were playing music, and then all of a sudden, like, oh, hang on a minute, we're now all dancing around his body. Okay.
Yes, and that's so far removed from what you would have experienced before, isn't it, in the UK?
And then on the day of the funeral, it was this, you know, I mean, we had energy drinks because we knew it was going to be, the rituals go on for hours and hours. Wow. This sort of about 5 or 6 hours of various kind of speeches and sort of ritual greetings between different parts of the family. And throughout all of that, we, the immediate family, are in the middle of this gathering of, I think there were kind of 300 or 400 people there.
My goodness.
The open coffin is in the middle of everyone, and we're all stood around that, and, you know, I was crying with my husband and, you know, brothers-in-law and children, you know, for most of that time, you know, on and off. But and then, yeah, there's a bit then when it's okay, it's time to put the lid on now and take him off to be buried. And so, yeah, there was this huge amount of ceremony and opportunity for, you know, grieving together. And then about, I'm trying to remember exactly how many days after, but it was, I think it was about a week afterwards. Oh, there's another ceremony happening today, my husband said, so I didn't really know what that meant. That what happened was all of the people who shared a family name with my mother-in-law, it's a kind of clan system, you know, that you know, that I'm married into, and all of the people that shared her a family connection with her, and also like other members of her actual family, you know, who are still there, all gathered. And again, they all sort of sit around the edges of the room, and they brought food. They brought a, you know, particular dish that they need to sort of, you know, brought food for everyone. And then after the food, the sort of elder person from the village then, what happened is, the structure seemed to be, they invited my mum-in-law to tell the story of her husband's death, you know, so to recount her what happened from her point of view. And also she was telling this story, you know, she was crying, and, you know, no one was trying to stop her from crying. You know, we instantly do that kind of soothing, which can be like a kind of there, don't cry kind of, but, you know, that it was, you know, there wasn't any sense of that. It was just this is a space for her to tell her story. Everyone was there to hear it. And then again, everything's all very hierarchical. The eldest son, you know, told his story. You know, they each of you know, his wife and then his 5 sons each told their story in their own words of how what happened. And I just thought, what an incredible, powerful thing, you know, that the community have come, they haven't left this family alone to grieve alone, and neither of the family kind of having to kind of deal with it. But there's this moment where everyone can tell their story, and in telling the story, you know how important it is for people to sort of tell that story. And they often I don't know about you, Claire, but we usually start, don't we, when we meet the families that we work with and say, well, what happened? And we might spend quite a long time just hearing their story of what happened leading up to the death. And that isn't necessarily what we're going to make lots of notes on telling us, but it's really important kind of
it's a witnessing process, isn't it? It's holding a space for people to tell you what happened without that sort of traditional stiff British upper lip kind of thing where you know, oh yeah, she was very poorly and she's passed, but I'm going to be strong about this. It's where they can say this, and like you say, you quite often don't use that in the actual eulogy, and they quite often don't want you to use that in the eulogy, do they?
I mean, it's so kind of earth-shatteringly overwhelming, isn't it, actually, loss and grief. And it sort of hit me afresh, obviously, this year, you know, last year, when it was, as I say, a closer friend. I remember going to see him at the funeral directors, which, you know, luckily I, you know, had that opportunity to go and see him, which I don't think I would have been able to do the funeral otherwise. And, you know, I was able to kind of have a kind of big release myself there of, you know, sitting with his body. But I'm saying to my lovely funeral director colleague, it doesn't matter how long you do this job, you kind of think you've got used to it, but then when it impacts on you personally, you realize it's huge, and we struggle as humans to make any sense of it. So what those rituals are for is to try and give us some kind of space to make sense of what's happened, individually and as a family and as a community, and how we make sense of things as human beings is we tell the stories of them. We tell the stories of that person's life. In this case, there was this moment for people to be able to tell the story of the person's death and their experience of the death, which is obviously different for each person, and what they are maybe struggling with, you know, or as I recall it, each of them did have maybe something that they were struggled a little bit, struggling to make sense of in that moment.
Well, they won't all have the same experience, would they? I mean, the sons that were abroad, you know, had to deal with slightly different emotions.
I mean, my husband had to deal with the fact that him and his brother had gone to watch England playing in the World Cup, so weren't in the room, you know, at the time, or gone to watch I don't know, you know, I guess you're there, and anyway. But,
but that is, like you say, life does go on, and you know, I love the idea of your father-in-law being in that bed in the middle of the room. And what I was going to ask you was, how old were your little ones when you went, and how did they deal with that? Because we tend to hide death from children. And I just...
So they were 5 and 9.
And they coped all right with seeing Granddad?
They knew that, you know, that was their first experience of death and loss, and that was what was normal there. So that was what was normal for them, you know. So there wasn't any question that could be concealed from them in any way. You know, they're going to their, you know, that's just the way it was, and they certainly weren't traumatized by it, because it's, you know, they, in a way, you know, they had the kind of maximum opportunity to kind of try and make sense of it, really. And they could see, you know, there he is, he's dead. They could see, you know, there's their grandmother, their Oppenborough, who they love, you know, obviously, you know, heartbroken and crying, and their dad and their uncles, but then life going on as well, you know, and this kind of, I think I feel like it was really a good thing.
I
you
think
know.
it probably was, because you
Yeah,
should think here, somebody dies and they go to the funeral directors, and unless you take the children to sit, for them to understand what death is, which is a huge thing when you're little, to
yeah,
understand that you're not going to see that person again, that they're not, that, you know, you say, well, they've gone to sleep. Well, they kind of have gone to sleep, but you can't get the idea of the context of forever. And to
yeah.
actually see him must have been very educational, is not the right word, but it must have been a wonderful experience, a learning experience. That's not the right
Yeah,
word.
I know what you're saying. It's they've had the opportunity for something that not many children
Yeah,
in their culture will have. This
and
is
their
also,
understanding must be better.
yeah, I think so. I think so. This is also making me think about another kind of really formative experience for me as a celebrant. I'm going slightly off topic of
Go for
the
it.
moral, but then I suppose yes, we're all in the same. Yeah. So this is a friend of mine, Pippa, who had a terminal cancer diagnosis as a single mother of a nearly 6-year-old. And the way that she met her death, her, you know, impending inevitable death, and prepared for that, obviously everything for her was focused on her son,
Yeah, of course.
trying to sort of help and support him through that process as much as she possibly could. So, you know, he did have he had a play therapist, you know, during the time of her illness, and she spent a lot of time, you know, making, like, they made like beautiful kind of photo collages together, you know, of their kind of life together. And I went round to visit her one day and she said, "Do you want to see my coffin?" And she'd had her coffin made. She'd had this coffin made by a crafts person that she knew at the Buddhist Centre, and it was just a wooden coffin, but it was all painted gold. And the lid, she'd made a sort of design on the lid that was like a sort of geometric shape with a sort of diamond shape in the middle, and then sections kind of radiating off it. And she said, "This bit in the middle, I'm going to decorate, and these 2 bits Thomas is going to decorate, and I just want you to put a little sticker on one of the segments, and you can come and decorate it. You know, you can do it before I die, after I die, you know, stick whatever you want, you know, just do whatever you want to it." And so he was obviously prepared that she was going to be in this coffin, and then she said which clothes she wanted to be dressed in. She asked one of her friends to be the person, you know, that was going to help dress her wherever and whenever she died. But she ended up dying in hospital, but she had already prepared the room, even sort of put out the candles and said, "This is where I want to be. I want to be brought home. I want to be at home from the time I die until the time of the funeral, and I want Thomas to be able to come and visit me whenever he wants to," you know. So she wanted him to be able to have that opportunity to sort of take in that reality of it. And it was really profound actually for me, Claire, because I lost my mum at the age of 5.
Oh gosh.
And you know, in 1970, it was very much of the, you know, the less said and shown and of it the better, and let's just, you know, try and gloss over it as best we can, kind of. And, you know, no opportunity for any kind of goodbye or funeral or anything really. So it just so happened that I had gone to visit her lying in her coffin at the moment when her little son decided to kind of come in, and he had a few little dreadlocks that he chopped them off and put them in his mum's hand. And it was yeah, I really feel that was a tremendously helpful for him as well. And you know, I feel it very deeply, because it was actually transformatively helpful for me as a sort of retrospective thing to witness.
Of course.
It actually transformed something very powerfully for me. actually had a really amazing dream around that time of laying my own mum to rest.
Oh,
So yeah.
oh, how beautiful.
Yeah. So it's pretty special, really. So yeah, we were talking about memorial rituals, weren't we? So we're talking about, I guess in talking about memorial rituals, we're talking about how our culture normally is,
Yeah.
which is that we don't have those kind of these things are out
No,
of
we
the
don't, do
ordinary.
we?
These things that we're talking about are out of the ordinary, and yet for just a few generations back, it would have been very much in the ordinary, you
It
know.
would definitely.
For millennia, up until about 100 years ago, everybody would have dealt with this at home. And
yeah, was like I said, my mum was, she said she was 9 when her nan died, so that would have been 1950. She'll kill me for this. 1955. And her nan, because they lived in the same house, was laid out in her bedroom, which was one of the downstairs rooms. She had a downstairs parlour, and she was laid out in there. And mum, it wasn't, she did go and see her. She wasn't particularly close to her, because her nan had been poorly, so she wasn't as though she had a real nanny granddaughter relationship, although they lived together. I mean, obviously she loved her, she was her grandma, but she wasn't super close to her. But she didn't find anything weird about her being laid out in the front room, and that's just 70 years ago.
Yeah, because for children, they may, what is normal for them is what we show them.
What we show them, absolutely.
Yeah. So if we, like for my kids, that's normal. For my husband, he found it really bizarre that I started doing this work and that I didn't actually see any of the bodies of the people that I'm doing funerals for. He found that kind of mind-blowingly weird.
Yeah, I can understand that, and I have to say, I always feel I work better. I mean, families are really keen to show you a photo of their loved one, which I absolutely, obviously, a lot of my family meetings have been on Zoom because they've had to be.
Yeah.
But I do love seeing the photos, because that is missing if you don't have that visual image of them, and some kind of, I don't mean necessarily a woo-woo connection, but some kind of, you're writing about somebody you've never seen, never met. It's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, you need to, you're always looking for that feeling as if you have met them, aren't you? You're always looking to kind of, you look for that feeling as if you've really encountered them and you've got a sense of really who that
an essence of them. Yeah, definitely. Because we were saying before we sort of went live about sort of the Day of the Dead in talking about rituals and remembering people, like the Day of the Dead in Mexico, and that's when's that? Is that early November? Did we just say?
Yeah, I think it's around what we say Halloween or Samhain. I think
that's it.
Dia de los Muertos. I think it is the same. Or what we in the Christian calendar is All Hallows Eve.
Yeah.
And in our pagan calendar, traditional wheel of the year would be Samhain. So the time of the halfway in between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice, so really when we're going into that darkest time of year, and
that's a time we associate with the ancestors as well, isn't it? So it's kind of it's a time of year for it.
And I think it was a tradition in Britain for people to visit graves as their family, at that time.
Okay.
It would be a tradition for families to go and, share food and, get together, visit the grave and tend the grave.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because that's what they do in Mexico, don't they? And they will go and feast at the grave of their loved one.
Yeah.
Or loved ones.
And we do that as well in, every time we go back to Sumatra. We don't feast, but every time we go back, we always make time when we're there to go and visit Opung Dolly, Granddad. And again, there's a kind of set thing that happens. And so what happens when people go and visit a grave, in Batak community is we'll gather flowers, just flower heads and flower petals rather than sort of cut flowers. So we'll just go around the garden, because obviously being equatorial, there's always flowers. So we'll just, we'll go around the garden and collect flowers. And my mum-in-law is very organised. We'll always have, packed some kind of, picnic water for everybody. And they'll always take a fag, because he was quite a heavy smoker. And we'll go to the grave, tidy up all the grave, just like tidy it up all together, all decorate it with petals. So it will be, he'll be just sort of blanketed with,
oh, that's beautiful,
the blooms on, on his grave. It will just be all, we'll all arrange the flowers together. And then my mum-in-law always say, oh, tell him the news, tell him. So we have to sort of say, well, Moss is at university now, and you'd be very proud of him. You'd really like the fact that he's now become a great musician, because we hear that he gets his musical talents from you, and we have to update him on the family news. Someone will light a fag for him and just put it over where his head would be. If there's anything being eaten and drunk, a little bit of it will go on the grave, and then it'll be usually my mother-in-law who'll say when it's time to go. And then when it's time to go, one by one, we have to wash our face. We have a bottle of water, and we just need to wash our face 3 times over the grave, and it's almost like washing your tears away.
Okay.
And then when we leave, we mustn't look back. That's the
okay. What's the sort of the thought process behind that? Just to be moving forward, or
I think it is like, we've made this space for grieving together, and now but we can always come back, and we always will come back.
That's an interesting concept, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was really, really lovely to be able to do that for a really good friend of mine, my best friend in that village, which has been part of our family life, since my 2 younger sons, who are 24 and 20 now, and all through their lives we've gone there every sort of few years. So it's a part of our life, and we're a part of that village life. My best friend there had died of breast cancer as quite a young woman, and it was great as well when I got back to be able to know that I could go and do that thing, with her brother and my other sister-in-law, who's also close to her. And it's like, it's not, we're just going to visit the grave, what should we do? It's like, we're going to go and do that thing. We're going to take the flowers, we're going to tell her the news, we're going to have a cry, and then we're going to wash our tears. And
it's strange, isn't it? Jen, my friend Jenny's watching. There's got lots of people watching, but she said the washing the tears away, not looking back, sounds beautiful, and I think that is. And I like the fact that there is a thing to do, a specific thing to do.
Yes,
so you can do that because we do all talk to. I mean, I go to see my nan. And I still say I'm going to go see my nan, and my nan has been dead for 25 years, but I still say I'm going to go and see nan. And I tell her all, like you say, all what the children have been up to and everything. And it's, it is absolutely lovely that I can do that. It's like the doorbell's just gone. I'm just seeing if my daughter's getting it, because I think it's a return.
Oh,
I knew it would happen. It would happen during this. It's typical, isn't it? Excuse me.
Okay, I'll carry on talking while you're gone.
Go for it. So if you can tell us a bit more about that.
Okay. No, I'm while Claire's gone, I'll carry on talking about this. This visiting of the grave and the talking to the person who's passed. It was just making me think actually about yesterday. I went to visit a family that I'm, a couple that I'm going to be doing a wedding for, and they were telling me about the groom's mother, so the bride's, mother-in-law, who she's never actually met, her fiance's mum actually died a couple of years before they met, but this you know, her mother-in-law is still very clearly a part of that family life, because they do all talk about her. I was just talking about I went to see a wedding couple yesterday, and yeah, they planted there were two rose bushes that shared the name of the groom's mother. So she was called Madge, and they had these two rose bushes that were the Madge's rose bushes in the garden where they're going to get married. And they've chosen her favourite song for the bride to walk into.
Aww.
And this bride never actually met the mother-in-law to be when she was alive, but because they have these kind of rituals in their life, you know, she's still a part of family life. Someone can still be a part of family life. That's how it is for my kids. I'm thinking, you know, it's like their granddad, you know, my father-in-law, he's still a part of our family life, because every time we go over, we go and visit, you know. And I'm just thinking about that in relation now to it's a very sad story, you know, I've mentioned to you before, Claire. Yeah, one of the saddest funerals I've ever done, really, which was for a little boy called Kit Tarker. And if anyone's moved by this story, I will say, please, you know, look up the Kit Tarker Foundation and maybe even consider getting involved in a fundraiser they're doing at the moment. But he died at 14 days old of herpes simplex virus, which is just the cold sore virus, which is
my gosh,
so many people, and it's very little known that it can be fatal, you know, to a newborn infant, and it wasn't identified as what he was suffering from, and had it been, you know, that death could have been averted. And his family have now set up a foundation, the Kit Tarker Foundation, you know, to educate and inform and across the medical profession, you know, to for, you know, preventing, you know, avertible baby deaths. But yeah, this family were friends of a friend of mine, and that's how I was put in touch with them. And you know, obviously everything that had happened from the birth of their baby until his death was completely outside of their control, and they had no control over, you know, those horrific events, really, and obviously were, you know, horribly traumatized by everything they'd been through. And so all I could do as their funeral celebrant was to just try and give them as much control as possible of how they were going to say goodbye, you know, and really put everything about that service, you know, within their control. And we did have a very beautiful, you know, little farewell for him. And sometime afterwards, you know, we don't keep in touch with all of our clients, do we? But sometimes it feels, you know, especially because they were just a sort of step removed, you know, we had a friend in common. I was, you know, well, if we met in any other way, you know, I would like to keep in touch. Also, you know, we've been through something very deep and profound together, and you know, I
can see how much it's affected you. I can see it still.
Yeah. Well, I had never told them as well that I had a friend of theirs had made a beautiful wooden casket with all kind of smooth and rounded and pushed. It was like a sort of egg, you know, that he was in this beautiful oak casket. And I went to this lovely funeral directors around the corner from me to go and travel up in the car with them, and I actually, you know, carried him on my lap in his little casket, you know, when we went up to the cemetery. And I need to kind of tell them that. I just emailed them and, you know, said how are they getting on, and would they like to meet up, you know, and we just met outside a pub, you know, in a and just had a drink and a chat, you know, some months after, and I just was talking to them about memorial rituals and saying, you know, there is a lot of research, you know, I've sort of trawled through some of it, you know, I came across a newspaper article and then it got me really fascinated with this area. So I've looked into, there are quite a number now of scholarly articles in the field of psychology, mainly, researching the impact of grief rituals. And, you know, a ritual action is any action that we do, that we choose to do, you know, that we have control over those ritual actions. And the research shows that this, whatever forms of ritual people choose, just having any kind of form of ritual, be it as simple as cooking a loved one's favourite meal or listening to their favourite song at a particular moment.
Yeah.
You know, these kind of actions actually really help us to find that way of treading that path of grief. And I hesitated when I was writing about it. I was about to say move through our grief, and I thought, no, we don't move through. It stays with us forever. It's about moving with. So these things help us to, they're like stepping stones to help us find our way forward.
It's a pathway through it, and it's an acceptance in a way, isn't it, as well, of learning to live, because you don't get over it, you learn to live with it, don't you?
So yeah, I was just talking with them about, you know, how they might, what they might want to do, and they just had the idea. Then it's sort of what they took away from that conversation was, when it came to his anniversary of his birth, his dad made him a little wooden boat, and they went to, you know, a lovely river near us in Sussex, the Cuckmere River, and for a walk. And they, on the way, they, you know, gathered things that they found in nature, you know, and filled the boat with its little cargo.
That is beautiful.
And you know, they went at a time when the tide was going out, and you know, put the little boat, Kit Tarker's little boat, because his middle name Tarker is after Tarker the otter, you know, so he's hence, yeah, it was an otter place, you know, the river estuary near the sea. And so yeah, I
don't believe this, the doorbell has just gone again.
Okay.
that was a delivery as opposed to something else. So would you excuse me again?
No, right, Claire. It's not going on, isn't it?
I'm so sorry.
No worries. Yeah. So for anybody who's watching and listening, just if you want to write it down, it's Kit, K-I-T, Tarker, T-A-R-K-A. And if you look up the Kit Tarker Foundation, you'll see they've got an event coming up in just a couple of weeks. I think it's on the 25th or 26th of April. They've got a big, it's called Go Orange, and they're having a big fundraiser for the work of the Kit Tarker Foundation, which is really important. You go on their website, it explains, you know, the statistics and, you know, why this work is so needed. And I'm actually going to be doing a sponsored hula hoop myself. So I was just explaining how people could support the Kit Tarker Foundation if they want to.
Oh, that's such a lovely idea as well, isn't it?
Yeah, they have a day called Go Orange, and it just so happened that my new orange hula hoops had just arrived when I heard about their Go Orange fundraiser.
Hula hoops, not eating hula hoops.
No. I'm obsessed with my hula hoops.
Hula hoops. Yeah. Do you do sort of a friend of mine twirls hers?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm doing a sponsored hula hoop dance for Go Orange on the 26th. So if anyone wants to sponsor me to help raise money for the kids.
Oh, that's lovely.
There's a link on my Facebook page.
Awesome. Can you put that in the comments when we
I
finish
will
chatting?
do. Yes,
Yeah,
I will.
put it in there. Yeah, because
Yeah.
we were saying earlier on, I don't know if you've just covered this while I was downstairs running around with the postman. Never ever has that happened. But if they didn't pick this thing up, something came and it was broken, and if they didn't pick it up, then they won't replace. You know that you get an all-day slot 8 till 8. But we were saying earlier, weren't we, that where people have had to do very small funerals, that memorials could be quite a big thing over the coming year. And
oh gosh, yeah, there are going to be a lot of huge memorial gatherings. I think I've done quite a few. I'm sure you have. I'm sure all funeral celebrants have, where at the end we've said, well, you're all going to be looking forward to the time when you can actually come together and celebrate that person in style, and have that moment where you bring everyone that was part of their lives together. I
mean, you know that sort of a few people will have sort of perhaps got together somewhere safely in a garden, which they can now, but I mean, now they could go and sit outside of a pub, which is the traditional sort of thing, or go to someone's house and but it's things like I said to you, when my father-in-law died, my father-in-law was Irish, and so they're used to having a big, and he was one of 8, so there was a huge family to get together. So that was just before the lockdown. But when his brother died a few months later, they literally had half a dozen people. I think it was 15 people at the time, and that's that wasn't even all the immediate family. That wasn't all of his brothers and his children and his grandchildren. His sister had to stand outside. I mean, she chose to. She said, "You go in. You're his grandsons," and the rest of it. But I think, and there's a sense that they haven't been mourned. So I think a memorial service for for not just for Uncle Terry, but for so many people will be. And I think we all naturally do little things, like, for example, when you said about the food, and my cousin loved shepherd's pie. Every time he'd come, I'd make shepherd's pie. So every year on his the anniversary of his death, I make, because he was quite sudden and quite young, but I make a shepherd's pie for him. And
so that's your memorial ritual for your cousin.
It is. It can be as simple as that, or a playlist. I have a playlist for him. That his songs that he'd drive me berserk with, but they take on a new poignancy when he's not here to do that.
My friend Lenny, whose funeral that I did last year, he also knew he was quite poorly, so he had summoned me and gone through his plans with me, and he was very clear, that what needed, the main event was to be a big party that everyone must come to, and this was obviously we did all this plan before the pandemic, so that has to happen. And he specified a kind of playlist and certain things that need to happen and be said, in between these songs. So I'm thinking we're covering quite a lot of different aspects of how memorial rituals can work, and what they can be. So everything from, we're now talking maybe about a single big collective memorial event that's for everybody. We've talked about these kind of family rituals that are ongoing. We've talked about these maybe more personal, private family rituals, like that boat is
that's absolutely beautiful,
brother, and then also on my little flyer for this, I put a picture of my friend Lizzie's blanket, which I'll also note, which she's just been she's a textile artist, and she's just been stitching her dad's blanket that he had, and just that's her form of memorial ritual, that she does that by herself, but it's an act of love and remembrance. So all of these things are acts of love and remembrance, isn't it? That's what they are.
And I made a memorial cushion actually for my father-in-law from one of his old bowling shirts for my husband for Christmas, the first Christmas without him. And it was his bowling shirt, and if anybody's thinking about making them, they are so simple. I mean, I'm not bad with a sewing machine and that, but I'm not as, you know, I can make clothes, but I don't. But it was so simple to do. And it was one night Mark had a few ciders, which is very unlike my husband, but he'd had a few ciders, and I came in, and he'd nodded off on the sofa cuddling this pillow, just his head in this pillow cuddling it. And I thought, I'm so glad I made that, because because it's still, to him, it was still his dad's, and it didn't, you know, and it had been washed since his dad had worn it, because it was clean in their wardrobe, but it still smelt of his dad's washing stuff, and there was something so special about that. And that's something really simple that and that's a ritual, because I made that, like you say, with love for my husband, and it's something that's still there, because you do see these lovely shirt ones, don't you? And
I did another funeral I did that was quite close to me, was for my son's girlfriend's dad, you know,
oh gosh,
really of cancer, and I'd actually done his wedding for his second marriage as well, and they're a really lovely extended blended family, you know, who all get on really well with each other. And Tanya, his widow, made a shirt cushion for Ruby, his daughter. And then Ruby,
and that is, I think, when we think of ritual, we sometimes think of, you know, great big things. You know, like obviously, particularly in the pagan world, you think of ritual, and you do think of, you know, candles and maybe songs and chanting and all. But it could be that, if that's what you want. You know, a ritual of like high church kind of thing. But it can equally be a moment of thought or prayer or communication on a special day, or a non-special day as well.
So I'm just thinking, this is something I feel so passionate about, and I can see that you do as well, Claire. And I'm just thinking, you know, my real wish for this going forward is just that we can keep, you know, I'd love for anybody who's joining us for this conversation to talk about it with people that they know, and just keep this conversation going, and just for people to have that support, you know, to be able to think creatively, and for, you know, find their own personal rituals. But also, wouldn't it be great if we actually, as a society, you know, as communities, could reinvent those shared rituals and those shared ways that we can support each other, you know, like that occasion that I was talking about, you know, in the week after my father-in-law's death, you know, when as a community, you know, that we could come and just support people through their loss, rather than just, you know, leaving them alone to get on with it after their funeral.
Because there is a bit of I mean, I think we all know, whether we're involved in funerals or not, that, you know, the funeral, as well as honouring that person, is something big for the family, and it's a focus in those first few weeks, isn't it? And I know that after my mother-in-law's and my father-in-law's funeral, it was just really flat, and it's like there was nothing to do. There's no next thing, and it's a flatness, and it's a kind of, well, we get on with it now. And you're in no way, shape or form ready to get on with it. You know, and to have, do you remember when I was studying, I told you about the widow's pie my nana told me?
Yes.
And
You stayed with me. I love that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. But I think I've mentioned it before on here, but just to explain to anybody else, my nan told me about, she grew up in Aylesford, which is a village. Her and my granddad grew up in Aylesford, which is a village nearby. And she told me about a widow's pie, and what that is that they would take, when somebody was bereaved, they'd make a pie, whether it was like a shepherd's pie or an apple pie, whatever, in the pie dish, cover with a tea towel, give it to the family, to help them when you're, you know, you're at the bottom of the world, and you think, I can't be bothered to cook, but I've got a family to feed. And obviously as well, quite often that would be an economic thing, because especially if the breadwinner had died, you know, I'm talking about the early part of last century, when there wasn't, you know, necessarily benefits and things. And but also you don't feel like cooking, but you've got the practicalities of feeding a family and the people that come to help you. And obviously they've got your beautiful ceramic pie dish.
Yeah.
So when they knew they had to wash that up and bring that back to you to get you out in the community, so that people don't feel they're a burden by knocking on the door going, I really want to talk about so and so, but you would say, oh, hello Martha, and you come, how are you doing, come and have a cup of tea, thanks for my pie dish. And it was a way of getting the widow or the widower or the daughter out and into the community, and I think that's missing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, so much is missing, isn't it? We haven't even got those, you know, some people just don't know what to say.
No.
Or, you know, I think we've all sadly, you know, heard of those cases where, you know, I've heard it from bereaved people who've actually said that they've seen people crossing the street to avoid talking to them because they're frightened or don't know how to acknowledge it, or don't know how to. And
it's not that people don't care, it's that they generally don't know what to say. And funnily enough, the same Nan, I remember walking out of town with her, so I can't have been very old because she was quite poorly for the later years of her life. And she'd, there's Mr. Betteridge, I think it was, I must just go and see him because his wife died. And I thought, so anyway, holding Nanny's hand off, I trotted across the road, and she said, oh, hello Jim, or, you know, I'm so sorry to hear about Thelma, or, you know. And afterwards I said to her, weren't you worried about upsetting him? And she went, no, he's already upset. And she said that when my granddad died, people she'd known all her life crossed the road, saw her coming and crossed the road, and not because you couldn't hate my nan if you tried, you couldn't dislike her, she was lovely, but because they didn't know what to say. And she said that was worse than not saying anything. And she said, I'm already, if I cry, I'm already upset, I'm not going to be more upset, you know.
And that brings us back to the thing we were discussing earlier about children as well, isn't it? It's like people are scared that they'll be upset, or that they'll see that their adults around them are upset. But of course they are going to be upset. Everyone's going to be upset. That's part of life, and it's actually maybe feels safer to a child that it's allowed to, you know.
Yeah,
we're allowed to be upset. And,
of course.
You know, and it doesn't mean that life stops. And it's not a kind of mysterious thing. There's something going on hidden, and you know, it's just being open, isn't it? And finding ways for life to go on, and to somehow find the best ways we can to take our loved ones with us, you know, to carry them forward with us.
Which in itself promotes rituals for memorial, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, we've been chatting for an hour, River. So
doesn't feel like that, does it?
No, it doesn't. It always amazes me. So I think we'll sign off for now, but perhaps you'll come back another day and talk about something else with me.
I would love to. I've really enjoyed chatting with you, Claire. Thank you.
So thanks everyone for watching. We've had lots of people come in and watching, and I know some people are going to come back later on to catch up with that. And thank you so much, River, for holding the fort while I had to deal with Royal Mail and Hermes in the space of 5 minutes. Who could do that? So we'll go now, but
can I just give a quick little shout out, Claire, just for any of your followers who might want to know about the School of Celebrancy live broadcast?
Yes. Oh yeah.
I'm partly inspired by the likes of Claire, and we're going to have Claire on later in the year. I'm doing a School of Celebrancy live broadcast on the last Tuesday of every month at 8 p.m.
Okay.
So, the next one is on Tuesday the something of April at 8 p.m. The last Tuesday of April. Have you got a calendar in front of you?
30th, 2 weeks time.
2 weeks time, yeah.
No, so 27th, 2 weeks time.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about rituals for work and retirement.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. I have to tune into that. Well, thank you so much, River. And if you put all your contact details there and that on the things, and then anybody who's interested, and I know people will revisit it later. It's sort of it's a funny time in the day, but it works. So, all right, thanks very much, River.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me, Claire. It's been lovely.
Bye.
Bye.